The Further Adventures of Robinson Crusoe, Part 2, by Daniel Defoe. Chapter 14. Chapter Fort, Attacked by Tartars. It was the beginning of February, new style, when we set out from Pekin. And who canted him Pekin non affair the squappers de son Rosby. Sa nine gad next twistable for a shreedy aim milting a several of forest sit, some mixed with gold and had all quaswat and aclican de quarreling sticks, my cave after elect repeat sure part or their multi cardboard to Murphy Cabank. The company was very great, and, as near as I can remember, made between 300 and 400 horses, and upwards of 120 men, very well armed, and provided for all events, for as the eastern caravans are subject to be attacked by the Arabs, so are these by the Tartars. The company consisted of people of several nations, but there were above 60 of them, merchants or inhabitants of Moscow, though of them some were Livonians, and to our particular satisfaction, 5 of them were Scots, who appeared also to be men of great experience in business, and of very good substance. When we had traveled 1 day's journey, the guides, who were 5 in number, called all the passengers, except the servants, to a great council, as they called it. At this council everyone deposited a certain quantity of money to a common stock, for the necessary expense of buying forage on the way, where it was not otherwise to be had, and for satisfying the guides, getting horses, and the like. Here, too, they constituted the journey, as they call it, viz., they named captains and officers to draw us all up and give the word of command in case of an attack, and give everyone their turn of command. Nor was this forming us into order any more than what we afterwards found needful on the way. The road all on this side of the country is very populous, and is full of potters and earth makers, that is to say, people that temper the earth for the china ware. As I was coming along, our Portuguese pilot, who had always something or other to say to make us merry, told me he would show me the greatest rarity in all the country, and that I should have this to say of China after all the ill-humored things that I had said of it, that I had seen one thing which was not to be seen in all the world beside. I was very importunate to know what it was. At last he told me it was a gentleman's house, built with china ware. Well, says I, are not the materials of their buildings the products of their own country? And so it is all china ware, is it not? No, no, says he. I mean it is a house all made of china ware, such as you call it in England, or as it is called in our country. Porcelain. Well, says I, such a thing may be. How big is it? Can we carry it in a box upon a camel? If we can, we will buy it. Upon a camel, says the old pilot, holding up both his hands. Why, there is a family of 30 people lives in it. I was then curious, indeed, to see it, and when I came to it, it was nothing but this. It was a timber house, or a house built, as we call it in England, with lath and plaster. But all this plastering was really china ware, that is to say, it was plastered with the earth that makes china ware. The outside, which the sun shone hot upon, was glazed and looked very well, perfectly white and painted with blue figures, as the large china ware in England is painted, and hard as if it had been burnt. As to the inside, all the walls, instead of wainscot, were lined with hardened and painted tiles, like the little square tiles we call galley tiles in England, all made of the finest china, and the figures exceeding fine indeed, with extraordinary variety of colors, mixed with gold, many tiles making but one figure, but joined so artificially, the mortar being made of the same earth, that it was very hard to see where the tiles met. The floors of the rooms were of the same composition, and as hard as the earthen floors we have in use in several parts of England, as hard as stone, and smooth, but not burnt and painted, except some smaller rooms, like closets, which were all, as it were, paved with the same tile. The ceiling and all the plastering work in the whole house were of the same earth, and, after all, the roof was covered with tiles of the same, but of a deep shining black. This was a China warehouse indeed, truly and literally to be called so, and had I not been upon the journey, I could have stayed some days to see and examine the particulars of it. They told me there were fountains and fish ponds in the garden, all paved on the bottom and sides with the same, and fine statues set up in rows on the walks, entirely formed of the porcelain earth, burnt whole. As this is one of the singularities of China, so they may be allowed to excel in it. But I am very sure they excel in their accounts of it, for they told me such incredible things of their performance in crockery ware, for such it is that I care not to relate, as knowing it could not be true. They told me, in particular, of one workman that made a ship with all its tackle and masts, and sails in earthenware, big enough to carry 50 men. If they had told me he launched it, and made a voyage to Japan in it, I might have said something to it indeed, but as it was, I knew the whole of the story, which was, in short, that the fellow lied, so I smiled and said nothing to it. This odd sight kept me 2 hours behind the caravan, for which the leader of it for the day fined me about the value of 3 shillings, and told me if it had been 3 days' journey without the wall, as it was 3 days within, he must have fined me 4 times as much, and made me ask pardon the next council day. I promised to be more orderly, and, indeed, I found afterwards the orders made for keeping all together were absolutely necessary for our common safety. In 2 days more, we passed the great China Wall, made for fortification against the Tartars, and a very great work it is, going over hills and mountains in an endless track where the rocks are impassable and the precipices such as no enemy could possibly enter, or indeed climb up, or where, if they did, no wall could hinder them. They tell us its length is near 1,000 English miles, but that the country is 500 in a straight measured line, which the wall bounds, without measuring the windings and turnings it takes. It is about 4 fathoms high, and as many thick in some places. I stood still an hour or thereabouts without trespassing, on our orders for so long, the caravan was in passing the gate, to look at it on every side, near and far off. I mean what was within my view, and the guide, who had been extolling it for the wonder of the world, was mighty eager to hear my opinion of it. I told him it was a most excellent thing to keep out the Tartars, which he happened not to understand as I meant it, and so took it for a compliment. But the old pilot laughed. "Oh, Signor Inglese," says he, "you speak in colors." "In colors," said I. "What do you mean by that? Why, you speak what looks white this way, and black that way, gay one way, and dull another. You tell him it is a good wall to keep out Tartars. You tell me by that it is good for nothing but to keep out Tartars. I understand you, Senor Inglés. I understand you. But Senor Chinese understood you his own way." "Well," says I, "do you think it would stand out, an army of our country people with a good train of artillery, or our engineers with 2 companies of miners? Would not they batter it down in 10 days, that an army might enter in battaglia, or blow it up in the air, foundation and all, that there should be no sign of it left?" Aye, says he, "I know that." The Chinese wanted mightily to know what I said to the pilot, and I gave him leave to tell him a few days after, for we were then almost out of their country, and he was to leave us a little time after this. But when he knew what I said, he was dumb all the rest of the way, and we heard no more of his fine story of the Chinese power and greatness while he stayed. After we passed this mighty nothing called a wall, something like the Picts, walls so famous in Northumberland, built by the Romans, we began to find the country thinly inhabited, and the people rather confined to live in fortified towns, as being subject to the inroads and depredations of the Tartars, who rob in great armies, and therefore are not to be resisted by the naked inhabitants of an open country. And here I began to find the necessity of keeping together in a caravan as we traveled, for we saw several troops of Tartars roving about. But when I came to see them distinctly, I wondered more that the Chinese Empire could be conquered by such contemptible fellows, for they are a mere horde of wild fellows, keeping no order and understanding no discipline or manner of it. Their horses are poor lean creatures, taught nothing and fit for nothing. And this we found the first day we saw them, which was after we entered the park. Our leader for the day gave leave for about 16 of us to go a-hunting, as they call it. And what was this but a hunting of sheep? However, it may be called hunting too, for these creatures are the wildest and swiftest of foot. That ever I saw of their kind. Only they will not run a great way, and you are sure of sport when you begin the chase, for they appear generally 30 or 40 in a flock, and, like true sheep, always keep together when they fly. In pursuit of this odd sort of game, it was our hap to meet with about 40 Tartars, whether they were hunting mutton as we were, or whether they looked for another kind of prey, we know not. But as soon as they saw us, one of them blew a hideous blast on a kind of horn. This was to call their friends about them, and in less than 10 minutes a troop of 40 or 50 more appeared, at about a mile distance, but our work was over first, as it happened. One of the Scots merchants of Moscow happened to be amongst us, and as soon as he heard the horn, he told us that we had nothing to do but to charge them without loss of time, and drawing us up in a line, he asked if we were resolved. We told him we were ready to follow him, so he rode directly towards them. They stood gazing at us like a mere crowd, drawn up in no sort of order at all. But as soon as they saw us advance, they let fly their arrows, which missed us very happily. Not that they mistook their aim, but their distance. For their arrows all fell a little short of us, but with so true an aim that had we been about 20 yards nearer, we must have had several men wounded, if not killed. Immediately we halted, and though it was at a great distance, we fired, and sent them leaden bullets for wooden arrows, following our shot full gallop, to fall in among them sword in hand, for so our bold Scot that led us directed. He was, indeed, but a merchant, but he behaved with such vigor and bravery on this occasion, and yet with such cool courage too, that I never saw any man in action fitter for command. As soon as we came up to them, we fired our pistols in their faces and then drew. But they fled in the greatest confusion imaginable. The only stand any of them made was on our right, where 3 of them stood, and, by signs, called the rest to come back to them, having a kind of scimitar in there. Hands and their bows hanging to their backs. Our brave commander, without asking anybody to follow him, gallops up close to them, and with his fusee knocks one of them off his horse, killed the second with his pistol, and the third ran away. Thus ended our fight. But we had this misfortune attending it, that all our mutton we had in chase got away. We had not a man killed or hurt. As for the Tartars, there were about 5 of them killed. How many were wounded we knew not, but this we knew, that the other party were so frightened with the noise of our guns that they fled and never made any attempt upon us. We were all this while in the Chinese dominions, and therefore the Tartars were not so bold as afterwards, but in about 5 days we entered a vast wild desert, which held us 3 days and nights' march, and we were obliged to carry our water with us in great leathern bottles, and to encamp all night, just as I have heard they do in the desert of Arabia. I asked our guides whose dominion this was in, and they told me this was a kind of border that might be called no man's land, being a part of Great Karakathi or Grand Tartandary. That, however, it was all reckoned as belonging to China, but that there was no care taken here to preserve it from the inroads of thieves, and therefore it was reckoned the worst desert in the whole march, though we were to go over some much larger. In passing this frightful wilderness we saw, 2 or 3 times, little parties of the Tartars, but they seemed to be upon their own affairs, and to have no design upon us. And so, like the man who met the devil, if they had nothing to say to us, we had nothing to say to them. We let them go. Once, however, a party of them came so near as to stand and gaze at us. Whether it was to consider if they should attack us or not, we knew not. But when we had passed at some distance by them, we made a rear guard of 40 men and stood ready for them, letting the caravan pass half a mile or thereabouts before us. After a while they marched off, but they saluted us with 5 arrows of their parting, which wounded a horse so that it disabled him, and we left him the next day, poor creature, in great need of a good farrier. We saw no more arrows or Tartars that time. We traveled near a month after this, the ways not being so good as at first, though still in the dominions of the Emperor of China, but lay for the most part in the villages, some of which were fortified because of the incursions of the Tartars. When we were come to one of these towns, about 2 days and a half's journey before we came to the city of Nam, I wanted to buy a camel, of which there are plenty to be sold all the way upon that road, and horses also, such as they are, because so many caravans coming that way, they are often wanted. The person that I spoke to get me a camel would have gone and fetched one for me, but I, like a fool, must be officious and go myself along with him. The place was about 2 miles out of the village, where it seems they kept the camels and horses feeding under a guard. I walked it on foot with my old pilot and a Chinese, being very desirous of little variety. When we came to the place, it was a low, marshy ground, walled round with stones, piled up dry, without mortar or earth among them, like a park, with a little guard of Chinese soldiers at the door. Having bought a camel and agreed for the price, I came away, and the Chinese that went with me led the camel, when on a sudden came up 5 Tartars on horseback. 2 of them seized the fellow and took the camel from him, while the other 3 stepped up to me and my old pilot, seeing us, as it were, unarmed, for I had no weapon about me but my sword, which could but ill defend me against 3 horsemen. The first that came up stopped short upon my drawing my sword, for they are arrant cowards, but a second, coming upon my left, gave me a blow on the head, which I never felt till afterwards, and wondered, when I came to myself, what was the matter, and where I was, for he laid me flat on the ground. But my never-failing old pilot, the Portuguese, had a pistol in his pocket, which I knew nothing of, nor the Tartars either. If they had, I suppose they would not have attacked us, for cowards are always boldest when there is no danger. The old man, seeing me down, with the bold heart, stepped up to the fellow that had struck me, and laying hold of his arm with one hand, and pulling him down by main force a little towards him, with the other shot him into the head, and laid him dead upon the spot. He then immediately stepped up to him who had stopped us, as I said, and before he could come forward again, made a blow at him with the scimitar, which he always wore, but missing the man, struck his horse in the side of his head, cut one of the ears off by the root, and a great slice down by the side of his face. The poor beast, enraged with the wound, was no more to be governed by his rider, though the fellow sat well enough too, but away he flew, and carried him quite out of the pilot's reach, and at some distance, rising upon his hind legs, threw down the Tartar and fell upon him. In this interval the poor Chinese came in who had lost the camel, but he had no weapon. However, seeing the Tartar down and his horse fallen upon him, away he runs to him, and seizing upon an ugly weapon he had by his side, something like a pole-axe, he wrenched it from him, and made shift to knock his Tartarian brains out with it. But my old man had the third Tartar to deal with still, and seeing he did not fly as he expected, nor come on to fight him, as he apprehended, but stood stock still, the old man stood still too, and fell to work with his tackle to charge his pistol again. But as soon as the Tartar saw the pistol away, he scoured and left my pilot, my champion I called him afterwards, a complete victory. By this time I was a little recovered. I thought, when I first began to wake, that I had been in a sweet sleep. But, as I said above, I wondered where I was, how I came upon the ground, and what was the matter. A few moments after, as sense returned, I felt pain, though I did not know where, so I clapped my hand to my head and took it away bloody. Then I felt my head ache, and in a moment memory returned, and everything was present to me again. I jumped upon my feet instantly and got hold of my sword, but no enemies were in view. I found a Tartar lying dead, and his horse standing very quietly by him, and, looking further, I saw my deliverer, who had been to see what the Chinese had done, coming back with his hanger in his hand. The old man, seeing me on my feet, came running to me and joyfully embraced me, being afraid before that I had been killed. Seeing me bloody, he would see how I was hurt, but it was not much, only what we call a broken head. Neither did I afterwards find any great inconvenience from the blow, for it was well again in 2 or 3 days. We made no great gain, however, by this victory, for we lost a camel and gained a horse. I paid for the lost camel and sent for another, but I did not go to fetch it myself. I had had enough of that. The city of Naum, which we were approaching, is a frontier of the Chinese Empire, and is fortified in their fashion. We wanted, as I have said, above 2 days' journey of the city, when messengers were sent express to every part of the road to tell all travelers and caravans to halt till they had a guard sent for them, for that an unusual body of Tartars, making 10,000 in all, had appeared in the way, about 30 miles beyond the city. This was very bad news to travelers. However, it was carefully done of the governor, and we were very glad to hear we should have a guard. Accordingly, 2 days after, we had 200 soldiers sent us from a garrison of the Chinese on our left, and 300 more from the city of Naum, and with these we advanced boldly. The 300 soldiers from Naum marched in our front, the 200 in our rear, and our men on each side of our camels, with our baggage and the whole caravan in the center. In this order, and well prepared for battle, we thought ourselves a match for the whole 10,000 Mogul Tartars if they had appeared. But the next day, when they did appear, it was quite another thing. Chapter 15. Chapter 15. Mentioned of an Adol, which they destroy. Early in the morning, when marching from a little town called Changwil, we had a river to pass, which we were obliged to ferry. And, had the Tartars had any intelligence, that had been the time to have attacked us, when the caravan being over, the rear guard was behind. But they did not appear there. About 3 hours after, when we were entered upon a desert of about 15 or 16 miles over, we knew by a cloud of dust they raised that the enemy was at hand, and presently they came on upon the spur, our Chinese guards in the front, who had talked so big the day before, began to stagger, and the soldiers frequently looked behind them, a certain sign in a soldier that he is just ready to run away. My old pilot was of my mind, and being near me called out, "Signor Inglesy, these fellows must be encouraged or they will ruin us all, for if the Tartars come on they will never stand it." "If am of your mind," said I, "but what must be done?" "Done," says he, "let 50 of our men advance and flank them on each wing and encourage them. They will fight like brave fellows in brave company, but without this they will every man turn his back." Immediately I rode up to our leader and told him, who was exactly of our mind. Accordingly, 50 of us marched to the right wing and 50 to the left, and the rest made a line of rescue. And so we marched, leaving the last 200 men to make a body of themselves and to guard the camels, only that, if need were, they should send 100 men to assist the last 50. At last the Tartars came on, and an innumerable company they were. How many we could not tell, but 10,000 we thought at the least. A party of them came on first, and viewed our posture, traversing the ground in the front of our line. And as we found them within gunshot, our leader ordered the 2 wings to advance swiftly and give them a salvo on each wing with their shot, which was done. They then went off, I suppose, to give an account of the reception they were like to meet with. Indeed, that salute cloyed their stomachs, for they immediately halted, stood a while to consider of it, and wheeling off to the left, they gave over their design for that time, which was very agreeable to our circumstances. 2 days after we came to the city of Naun or Naum, we thanked the governor for his care of us, and collected to the value of 100 crowns, or thereabouts, which we gave to the soldiers sent to guard us, and here we rested one day. This is a garrison indeed, and there were 900 soldiers kept here. But the reason of it was that formerly the Muscovite frontiers lay nearer to them than they now do, the Muscovites having abandoned that part of the country which lies from this city west for about 200 miles, as desolate and unfit for use, and more especially being so very remote, and so difficult to send troops thither for its defense. For we were yet above 2,000 miles from Muscovy properly so called. After this we passed several great rivers and 2 dreadful deserts, one of which we were 16 days passing over, and on the 13th of April we came to the frontiers of the Muscovite dominions. I think the first town, or fortress, whichever it may he called, that belonged to the Tsar, was called Arguna, being on the west side of the river Arguna. I could not but feel great satisfaction that I was arrived in a country governed by Christians, for though the Muscovites do, in my opinion, but just deserve the name of Christians, yet such they pretend to be and are very devout in their way, it would certainly occur to any reflecting man who travels the world as I have done, what a blessing it is to be brought into the world where the name of God and a Redeemer is known, adored, and worshipped, and not where the people, given up to strong delusions, horrid-shaped animals, and more shamble imbras. Not a town or city we passed through, but had their pagodas, their idols, and their temples, and ignorant people worshipping even the works of their own hands. Now we came where, at least, a face of the Christian worship appeared, where the knee was bowed to Jesus, and whether ignorantly or not, yet the Christian religion was owned, and the name of the true God was called upon and adored, and it made my soul rejoice to see it. I saluted the brave Scots merchant with my first acknowledgment of this, and taking him by the hand, I said to him, "Blessed be God, we are once again amongst Christians." He smiled and answered, "Do not rejoice too soon, countrymen. These Muscovites are but an odd sort of Christians, and but for the name of it you may see very little of the substance for some months further of our journey." "Well," says I, but still it is better than paganism and worshipping of devils. Why, I will tell you, says he. Except the Russian soldiers in the garrisons and a few of the inhabitants of the cities upon the road, all the rest of this country, for above 1,000 miles farther, is inhabited by the worst and most ignorant of pagans. And so indeed we found it. We now launched into the greatest piece of solid earth that is to be found in any part of the world. We had at least 12,000 miles to the sea eastward, 2,000 to the bottom of the Baltic Sea westward, and above 3,000 if we left that sea and went on west to the British and French channels. We had full 5,000 miles to the Indian or Persian Sea south, and about 800 to the Frozen Sea north. We advanced from the river Arguna by easy and moderate journeys, and were very visibly obliged to the care the Tsar has taken to have cities and towns built in as many places as it is possible to place them, where his soldiers keep garrison, something like the stationary soldiers placed by the Romans in the remotest countries of their empire, some of which I had read of were placed in Britain for the security of commerce and for the lodging of travelers. Thus it was here, for wherever we came, though at these towns and stations the garrisons and governors were Russians and professed Christians, yet the inhabitants were mere pagans, sacrificing to idols and worshipping the sun, moon, and stars, or all the host of heaven, and not only so, but were of all the heathens and pagans that ever I met with, the most barbarous, except only that they did not eat men's flesh. Some instances of this we met with in the country between Arguna, where we enter the Muscovite dominions, and a city of Tartars and Russians together, called Norchiski, in which is a continued desert or forest, which cost us 20 days to travel over. In a village near the last of these places, I had the curiosity to go and see their way of living, which is most brutish and unsufferable. They had, I suppose, a great sacrifice that day, for there stood out, upon an old stump of a tree, a diabolical kind of idol made of wood. It was dressed up, too, in the most filthy manner. Its upper garment was of sheepskins, with the wool outward, a great Tartar bonnet on the head, with 2 horns growing through it. It was about 8 feet high, yet had no feet or legs, nor any other proportion of parts. This scarecrow was set up at the outer side of the village, and when I came near to it, there were 16 or 17 creatures all lying flat upon the ground round this hideous block of wood. I saw no motion among them, any more than if they had been all logs, like the idol, and at first I really thought they had been so, but when I came a little nearer, they started up upon their feet and raised a howl, as if it had been so many deep-mouthed hounds, and walked away, as if they were displeased at our disturbing them. A little way off from the idol, and at the door of a hut, made of sheep and cow skins dried, stood 3 men with long knives in their hands, and in the middle of the tent appeared 3 sheep killed, and 1 young bullock. These, it seems, were sacrifices to that senseless log of an idol. The 3 men were priests belonging to it, and the 17 prostrated wretches were the people who brought the offering, and were offering their prayers to that stock. I confess I was more moved at their stupidity and brutish worship of a hobgoblin than ever I was at anything in my life, and overcome with rage, I rode up to the hideous idol, and with my sword made a stroke at the bonnet that was on its head, and cut it in 2, and one of our men that was with me, taking hold of the sheepskin that covered it, pulled at it, when, behold, a most hideous outcry ran through the village, and 200 or 300 people came about my ears, so that I was glad to scour for it, for some had bows and arrows, but I resolved from that moment to visit them again. Our caravan rested 3 nights at the town, which was about 4 miles off, in order to provide some horses which they wanted, several of the horses having been lamed and jaded with the long march over the last desert, so we had some leisure here to put my design in execution. I communicated it to the Scots merchant, of whose courage I had sufficient testimony. I told him what I had seen, and with what indignation I had since thought that human nature could be so degenerate. I told him if I could get but 4 or 5 men well armed to go with me, I was resolved to go and destroy that vile, abominable idol, and let them see that it had no power to help itself, and consequently could not be an object of worship, or to be prayed to, much less help them that offered sacrifices to it. He at first objected to my plan as useless, seeing that, owing to the gross ignorance of the people, they could not be brought to profit by the lesson I meant to teach them, and added that, from his knowledge of the country and its customs, he feared we should fall into great peril by giving offense to these brutal idol worshippers. This somewhat stayed my purpose, but I was still uneasy all that day to put my project in execution, and that evening, meeting the Scots merchant in our walk about the town, I again called upon him to aid me in it. When he found me resolute, he said that, on further thoughts, he could not but applaud the design, and told me I should not go alone, but he would go with me. But he would go first, and bring a stout fellow, one of his countrymen, to go also with us, and once, then one either very quick, so we agreed to go, only we 3 and my manservant, and resolved to put it in execution the following night about midnight, with all possible secrecy. We thought it better to delay it till the next night, because the caravan being to set forward in the morning, we supposed the governor could not pretend to give them any satisfaction upon us when we were out of his power. The Scots merchant, as steady in his resolution for the enterprise as bold in executing, brought me a Tartar's robe or gown of sheepskins, and a bonnet with a bow and arrows, and had provided the same for himself and his countrymen, that the people, if they saw us, should not determine who we were. All the first night we spent in mixing up some combustible matter with aquavitae, gunpowder, and such other materials as we could get. And having a good quantity of tar in a little pot, about an hour after night we set out upon our expedition. We came to the place about 11 o'clock at night, and found that the people had not the least suspicion of danger attending their idol. The night was cloudy, yet the moon gave us light enough to see that the idol stood just in the same posture and place that it did before. The people seemed to be all at their rest, only that in the great hut where we saw the 3 priests we saw a light, and going up close to the door we heard people talking as if there were 5 or 6 of them. We concluded, therefore, that if we set wildfire to the idol, those men would come out immediately and run up to the place to rescue it from destruction, and what to do with them we knew not. Once we thought of carrying it away and setting fire to it at a distance, but when we came to handle it, we found it too bulky for our carriage, so we were at a loss again. The second Scotsman was for setting fire to the hut, and knocking the creatures that were there on the head when they came out. But I could not join with that. I was against killing them, if it were possible to avoid it. Well then, said the Scots merchant, I will tell you what we will do. We will try to make them prisoners tie their hands, and make them stand and see their idol destroyed. As it happened, we had twine or packthread enough about us, which we used to tie our firelocks together with, so we resolved to attack these people first, and with as little noise as we could. The first thing we did, we knocked at the door, when one of the priests coming to it, we immediately seized upon him, stopped his mouth, and tied his hands behind him, and led him to the idol, where we gagged him that he might not make a noise, tied his feet also together, and left him on the ground. Two of us then waited at the door, expecting that another would come out to see what the matter was. But we waited so long till the third man came back to us, and then nobody coming out, we knocked again gently, and immediately out came two more, and we served them just in the same manner, but were obliged to go all with them, and lay them down by the idol some distance from one another. When, going back, we found two more were come out of the door, and a third stood behind them within the door. We seized the two, and immediately tied them. When the third, stepping back and crying out, my Scots merchant went in after them, and taking out a composition we had made that would only smoke and stink, he set fire to it, and threw it in among them. By that time the other Scotsman and my man, taking charge of the two men already bound, and tied together also by the arm, led them away to the idol, and left them there, to see if their idol would relieve them, making haste back to us. When the fusee we had thrown in had filled the hut with so much smoke that they were almost suffocated, we threw in a small leather bag of another kind, which flamed like a candle, and, following it in, we found there were but 4 people, who, as we supposed, had been about some of their diabolical sacrifices. They appeared, in short, frightened to death, at least so as to sit trembling and stupid, and not able to speak either for the smoke. We quickly took them from the hut, where the smoke soon drove us out, bound them as we had done the other, and all without any noise. Then we carried them all together to the idol. When we came there, we fell to work with him. First, we daubed him all over, and his robes also, with tar and tallow mixed with brimstone. Then we stopped his eyes and ears and mouth full of gunpowder, and wrapped up a great piece of wildfire in his bonnet. Then, sticking all the combustibles we had brought with us upon him, we looked about to see if we could find anything else to help to burn him, when my Scotsman remembered that by the hut, where the men were, there lay a heap of dry forage. Away he and the other Scotsman ran and fetched their arms. When we had done this, we took all our prisoners and brought them, having untied their feet and ungagged their mouths, and made them stand up, and set them before their monstrous idol, and then set fire to the whole. We stayed by it a quarter of an hour or thereabouts, till the powder in the eyes and mouth and ears of the idol blew up, and, as we could perceive, had split altogether, and in a word, till we saw it burned, so that it would soon be quite consumed. We then began to think of going away. But the Scotsman said, no, we must not go, for these poor deluded wretches will all throw themselves into the fire and burn themselves with the idol. So we resolved to stay till the forage is burned down too, and then came away and left them. After the feat was performed, we appeared in the morning among our fellow travelers, exceedingly busy in getting ready for our journey, nor could any man suppose that we had been anywhere but in our beds. But the affair did not end so. The next day came a great number of the country people to the town gates, and in a most outrageous manner demanded satisfaction of the Russian governor for the insulting their priests and burning their great Chamchi Thaungu. The people of Nertsinke were at first in a great consternation, for they said the Tartars were already no less than 30,000. Strong. The Russian governor sent out messengers to appease them, assuring them that he knew nothing of it, and that there had not a soul in his garrison been abroad, so that it could not be from anybody there, but if they could let him know who did it, they should be exemplarily punished. They returned haughtily that all the country reverenced the great Chamchu Thaungu who dwelt in the sun, and no mortal would have dared to offer violence to his image but some Christian miscreant, and they therefore resolved to denounce war against him and all the Russians, who, they said, were miscreants and Christians. The governor, unwilling to make a breach or to have any cause of war alleged to be given by him, the Tsar, having strictly charged him to treat the conquered country with gentleness, gave them all the good words he could. At last he told them there was a caravan gone towards Russia that morning, and perhaps it was some of them who had done them this injury, and that if they would be satisfied with that, he would send after them to inquire into it. This seemed to appease them a little, and accordingly the governor sent after us and gave us a particular account how the thing was, intimating withal that if any in our caravan had done it, they should make their escape, but that whether we had done it or no, we should make all the haste forward that was possible, and that, in the meantime, he would keep them in play as long as he could. This was very friendly in the governor. However, when it came to the caravan, there was nobody knew anything of the matter, and as for us that were guilty, we were least of all suspected. However, the captain of the caravan for the time took the hint that the governor gave us, and we traveled 2 days and 2 nights without any considerable stop, and then we lay at a village called Plothus. Nor did we make any long stop here, but hastened on towards Jerowina, another Muscovite colony, and where we expected we should be safe. But upon the 2nd day's march from Plothus, by the clouds of dust behind us at a great distance, it was plain we were pursued. We had entered a vast desert and had passed by a great lake called Shanks Oser, when we perceived a large body of horse appear on the other side of the lake, to the north, we traveling west. We observed they went away west as we did, but had supposed we would have taken that side of the lake, whereas we very happily took the south side, and in 2 days more they disappeared again, for they, believing we were still before them, pushed on till they came to the Uda, a very great river when it passes farther north, but when we came to it we found it narrow and fordable. The 3rd day they had either found their mistake or had intelligence of us, and came pouring in upon us towards dusk. We had, to our great satisfaction, just pitched upon a convenient place for our camp, for as we had just entered upon a desert above 500 miles over, where we had no towns to lodge at, and, indeed, expected none but the city Jerowina, which we had yet 2 days' march to. The desert, however, had some few woods in it on this side, and little rivers, which ran all into the great river Uda. It was in a narrow strait, between little but very thick woods, that we pitched our camp that night, expecting to be attacked before morning. As it was usual for the Mogul Tartars to go about in troops in that desert, so the caravans always fortify themselves every night against them, as against armies of robbers, and it was, therefore, no new thing to be pursued. But we had this night a most advantageous camp, for as we lay between 2 woods, with a little rivulet running just before our front, we could not be surrounded or attacked any way but in our front or rear. We took care also to make our front as strong as we could, by placing our packs, with the camels and horses, all in a line, on the inside of the river, and felling some trees in our rear. In this posture we encamped for the night, but the enemy was upon us before we had finished. They did not come on like thieves, as we expected, but sent 3 messengers to us, to demand the men to be delivered to them that had abused their priests and burned their idol, that they might burn them with fire. And upon this they said they would go away and do us no further harm, otherwise they would destroy us all. Our men looked very blank at this message, and began to stare at one another to see who looked with the most guilt in their faces. But nobody was the word nobody did it. The leader of the caravan sent word he was well assured that it was not done by any of our camp, that we were peaceful merchants, traveling on our business, that we had done no harm to them or to anyone else, and that, therefore, they must look further for the enemies who had injured them, for we were not the people. So they desired them not to disturb us, for if they did we should defend ourselves. they were far from being satisfied with this for an answer, and a great crowd of them came running down in the morning by break of day to our camp. But seeing us so well posted, they durst come no farther than the brook in our front, where they stood in such number as to terrify us very much. Indeed, some spoke of 10,000. Here they stood and looked at us a while, and then, setting up a great howl, let fly a crowd of arrows among us. But we were well enough sheltered under our baggage, and I do not remember that one of us was hurt. Some time after this we saw them move a little to our right, and expected them on the rear, when a cunning fellow, a Cossack of Jarawina, calling to the leader of the caravan, said to him, "I will send all these people away to Sibylka." This was a city 4 or 5 days' journey at least to the right, and rather behind us. So he takes his bow and arrows, and getting on horseback, he rides away from our rear directly, as it were, back to Nersinske. After this, he takes a great circuit about, and comes directly on the army of the Tartars, as if he had been sent express to tell them a long story that the people who had burned the Chamchi Thaungu were gone to Sibylka with a caravan of miscreants, as he called them, that is to say, Christians, and that they had resolved to burn the god scale Izar, belonging to the Tongas. As this fellow was himself a Tartar and perfectly spoke their language, he counterfeited so well that they all believed him. And away they drove in a violent hurry to Sibylka. In less than 3 hours they were entirely out of our sight, and we never heard any more of them, nor whether they went to Sibylka or no. So we passed away safely on to Jarawina, where there was a Russian garrison, and there we rested 5 days. From this city we had a frightful desert, which held us 23 days' march. We furnished ourselves with some tents here, for the better accommodating ourselves in the night, and the leader of the caravan procured 16 wagons of the country, for carrying our water or provisions, and these carriages were our defense every night round our little camp, so that had the Tartars appeared, unless they had been very numerous indeed, they would not have been able to hurt us. We may well be supposed to have wanted rest again after this long journey, for in this desert we neither saw house nor tree, and scarce a bush, though we saw abundance of the sable hunters, who are all Tartars of Mogul Tartary, of which this country is a part, and they frequently attack. Small caravans, but we saw no numbers of them together. After we had passed this desert, we came into a country pretty well inhabited, that is to say, we found towns and castles, settled by the Tsar with garrisons of stationary soldiers, to protect the caravans and defend the country against the Tartars, who would otherwise make it very dangerous traveling, and his Tsarish Majesty has given such strict orders for the well guarding the caravans, that if there are any Tartars heard of in the country, detachments of the garrison are always sent to see the travelers that travel in station to station. Thus the governor of Adinskoy, whom I had an opportunity to make a visit to, by means of the Scots merchant who was acquainted with him, offered us a guard of 50 men if we thought there was any danger to the next station. I thought long before this that as we came nearer to Europe we should find the country better inhabited and the people more civilized, but I found myself mistaken in both, for we had yet the nation of the Tongases to pass through, where we saw the same tokens of paganism and barbarity as before, only as they were conquered by the Muscovites, they were not so dangerous, but for rudeness of manners and idolatry, no people in the world ever went beyond them. They are all clothed in skins of beasts, and their houses are built of the same. You know not a man from a woman, neither by the ruggedness of their countenances nor their clothes. And in the winter, when the ground is covered with snow, they live underground is covered with snow, they live underground in vaults, which have cavities going from one to another. If the Tartars had their Shamchi Thangu for a whole village or country, these had idols in every hut and every cave. This country, I reckon, was, from the desert I spoke of last, at least 400 miles, half of it being another desert, which took us up 12 days' severe traveling, without house or tree, and we were obliged again to carry our own provisions, as well water as bread. After we were out of this desert and had traveled 2 days, we came to Genese, a Muscovite. City or station on the great river Genese, which, they told us there, parted Europe from Asia. All the country between the river Obi and the river Genese is as entirely pagan, and the people as barbarous, as the remotest of the Tartars. I also found, which I observed to the Muscovite governors whom I had an opportunity to converse with, that the poor pagans are not much wiser or nearer Christianity for being under the Muscovite government, which they acknowledged was true enough, but that, as they said, was none of their business, that if the Tsar expected to convert his Siberian, Tungus, or Tartar subjects, it should be done by sending clergymen among them, not soldiers, and they added, with more sincerity than I expected, that it was not. From this river to the Obi we crossed a wild, uncultivated country, barren of people and good management. Otherwise it is in itself a pleasant, fruitful, and agreeable country. What inhabitants we found in it are all pagans, except such as are sent among them from Russia. For this is the country, I mean on both sides, the river Obi, whither the Muscovite criminals that are not put to death are banished, and from whence it is next to impossible they should ever get away. I have nothing material to say of my particular affairs till I came to Tobolsky, the capital city of Siberia, where I continued some time on the following account. We had now been almost 7 months on our journey, and winter began to come on apace, whereupon my partner and I called a council about our particular affairs, in which we found it proper, as we were bound for England, to consider how to dispose of ourselves. They told us of sledges and reindeer to carry us over the snow in the winter time, by which means, indeed, the Russians travel more in winter than they can in summer, as in these sledges they are able to run night and day. The snow, being frozen, is one universal covering to nature, by which the hills, vales, rivers, and lakes are all smooth and hard as a stone, and they run upon the surface without any regard to what is underneath. But I had no occasion to urge a winter journey of this kind. I was bound to England, not to Moscow, and my route lay 2 ways. Either I must go on as the caravan went till I came to Yaroslavl, and then go off west for Narva and the Gulf of Finland, and so on to Danzig, where I might possibly sell my China cargo to good advantage, or I must leave the caravan at a little town on the Dwina, from whence I had but 6 days by water to Archangel, and from thence, from whence I had but 6 days by water to Archangel, and from thence, Bermut be sure of shipping either had either. Now, to go any one of these journeys in the winter would have been preposterous, for as to Danzig, the Baltic would have been frozen up, and I could not get passage, and to go by land in those countries was far less safe than among the Mogul Tartars. Likewise, as to Archangel in October, all the ships would be gone from thence, and even the merchants who dwell there in summer retire south to Moscow in the winter when the ships are gone, so that I could have nothing but extremity of cold to encounter, with a scarcity of provisions, and must lie in an empty town all the winter. Therefore, upon the whole, I thought it much my better way to let the caravan go, and make provision to winter where I was, at Tobolski, in Siberia, in the latitude of about 60 degrees, where I was sure of 3 things to wear out a cold winter with, viz., plenty of provisions, such as the country afforded, a warm house with fuel enough, and excellent company. I was now in quite a different climate from my beloved island, where I never felt cold except when I had my ague. On the contrary, I had much to do to bear any clothes on my back, and never made any fire but without doors, which was necessary for dressing my food. Now I had 3 good vests, with large robes or gowns over them, to hang down to the feet, and button close to the wrists, and all these lined with furs, to make them sufficiently warm. As to a warm house, I must confess I greatly dislike our way in England of making fires in every room of the house in open chimneys, which, when the fire is out, always keeps the air in the room cold as the climate. So I took an apartment in a good house in the town, and ordered a chimney to be built like a furnace, in the center of 6 several rooms, like a stove. The funnel to carry the smoke went up one way, the door to come at the fire went in another, and all the rooms were kept equally warm, but no fire seen, just as they heat baths in England. By this means we had always the same climate in all the rooms, and an equal heat was preserved, and yet we saw no fire, nor were ever incommoded with smoke. The most wonderful thing of all was, that it should be possible to meet with good company here, in a country so barbarous as this one of the most northerly parts of Europe. But this being the country where the state criminals of Muscovy, as I observed before, are all banished, this city was full of Russian noblemen, gentlemen, soldiers, and courtiers. Here was the famous prince Galitzin, the old German Robostiski, and several other persons of note, and some ladies. By means of my Scotch merchant, whom, nevertheless, I parted with here, I made an acquaintance with several of these gentlemen, and from these, in the long winter nights in which I stayed here, I received several very agreeable visits. Chapter 16. Safe arrival on England. It was talking one night with a certain prince, one of the banished ministers of state belonging to the Tsar, that the discourse of my particular case began. He had been telling me abundance of fine things of the greatness, the magnificence, the dominions, and the absolute power of the Emperor of the Russians. I interrupted him, and told him I was a greater and more powerful prince than ever the Tsar was, though my dominion were not so large, or my people so many. The Russian grandee looked a little surprised, and fixing his eyes steadily upon me, began to wonder what I meant. I said his wonder would cease when I had explained myself, and told him the story at large of my living in the island, and then how I managed both myself and the people that were under me, just as I have since minuted it down. They were exceedingly taken with the story, and especially the prince, who told me with a sigh that the true greatness of life was to be masters of ourselves, that he would not have exchanged such a state of life as mine to be Tsar of Muscovy, and that he found more felicity in the retirement. He seemed to be banished to there than ever he found in the highest authority he enjoyed in the court of his master the Tsar. That the height of human wisdom was to bring our tempers down to our circumstances, and to make a calm within, under the weight of the greatest storms without. When he came first hither, he said, he used to tear the hair from his head, and the clothes from his back, as others had done before him. But a little time and consideration had made him look into himself, as well as round him to things without, that he found the mind of man, if it was but once brought to reflect upon the state of universal life, and how little this world was concerned in its true felicity, was perfectly capable of making a felicity for itself, fully satisfying it its true after that being now deprived of all the fancied felicity which he enjoyed in the full exercise of worldly pleasures, he said he was at leisure to look upon the dark side of them, where he found all manner of deformity, and was now convinced that virtue only makes a man truly wise, rich, and great, and preserves him in the way to a superior happiness in a future state. And in this, he said, they were more happy in their banishment than all their enemies were, who had the full possession of all the wealth and power they had left behind them. Nor, sir, says he, do I bring my mind to this politically from the necessity of my circumstances, which some call miserable, but, if I know anything of myself, I would not now go back, though the Tsar my master should call me, and reinstate me in all my former grandeur. He spoke this with so much warmth in his temper, so much earnestness and motion of his spirits, that it was evident it was the true sense of his soul. There was no room to doubt his sincerity. I told him I once thought myself a kind of monarch in my old station, of which I had given him an account, but that I thought he was not only a monarch, but a great conqueror, for he that had got a victory over his own exorbitant desires and the absolute dominion over himself, he whose reason entirely governs his will, is certainly greater than he that conquers a city. I had been here 8 months, and a dark dreadful winter I thought it, the cold so intense that I could not so much as look abroad without being wrapped in furs, and a kind of mask of fur before my face, with only a hole for breath, and 2 for sight. The little daylight we had was for 3 months not above 5 hours a day, and 6 at most, only that the snow lying on the ground continually, and the weather being clear, it was never quite dark. Our horses were kept, or rather starved, underground, and as for our servants, whom we hired here to look after ourselves and horses, we had every now and then their fingers and toes to thaw and take care of, lest they should mortify and fall off. It is true, within doors we were warm, the houses being close, the walls thick, the windows small, and the glass all double. Our food was chiefly the flesh of deer, dried and cured in the season, bread good enough but baked as biscuits. Dried fish of several sorts, and some flesh of mutton and of buffaloes, which is pretty good meat. All the stores of provisions for the winter are laid up in the summer, and well cured. Our drink was water, mixed with aqua vitae instead of brandy, and for a treat, mead instead of wine, which, however, they have very good. The hunters, who venture abroad all weathers, frequently brought us in fine venison, and sometimes bear's flesh, but we did not much care for the last. We had a good stock of tea, with which we treated our friends, and we lived cheerfully and well, all things considered. It was now March, the days grown considerably longer, and the weather at least tolerable, so the other travelers began to prepare sledges to carry them over the snow, and to get things ready to be going. But my measures being fixed, as I have said, for Archangel, and not for Muscovy or the Baltic, I made no motion, knowing very well that the ships from the south do not set out for that part of the world till May or June, and that if I was there by the beginning of August, it would be as soon as any ships would be ready to sail. Therefore I made no haste to be gone, as others did. In a word, I saw a great many people, nay, all the travelers, go away before me. It seems every year they go from thence to Muscovy for trade to carry furs, and buy necessaries, which they bring back with them to furnish their shops. Also others went on the same errand to Archangel. In the month of May I began to make all ready to pack up, and, as I was doing this, It occurred to me that, seeing all these people were banished by the Tsar to Siberia, and yet, when they came there, were left at liberty to go whither they would, why they did not then go away to any part of the world, wherever they thought fit, and I began to examine what should hinder them from making such an attempt. But my wonder was over when I entered upon that subject with the person I have mentioned, who answered me thus: "Consider first, sir," said he, "the place where we are, and secondly, the condition we are in, especially the generality of the people who are banished thither. We are surrounded with stronger things than bars or bolts. On the north side an unnavigable ocean, where ship never sailed and boat never swam. Every other way we have above 1,000 miles to pass through the Tsar's own dominion, and by ways utterly impassable, except by the roads made by the government, and through the towns, garrisoned by his troops. In short, we could neither pass undiscovered by the road, nor subsist any other way, so that it is in vain to attempt it." I was silenced at once, and found that they were in a prison every jot as secure as if they had been locked up in the castle at Moscow. However, it came into my thoughts that I might certainly be made an instrument to procure the escape of this excellent person, and that, whatever hazard I ran, I would certainly try if I could carry him off. Upon this, I took an occasion one evening to tell him my thoughts. I represented to him that it was very easy for me to carry him away, there being no guard over him in the country, and as I was not going to Moscow, but to Archangel, and that I went in the retinue of a caravan, by which I was not obliged to lie in the stationary towns in the desert, but could encamp every night where I would, we might easily pass uninterrupted to Archangel, where I would immediately secure him on board an English ship, and carry him safe along with me. And as to his subsistence and other particulars, it should be my care till he could better supply himself. He heard me very attentively, and looked earnestly on me all the while I spoke. Nay, I could see in his very face that what I said put his spirits into an exceeding ferment. His color frequently changed, his eyes looked red, and his heart fluttered, till it might be even perceived in his countenance. Nor could he immediately answer me when I had done, and, as it were, hesitated what he would say to it. But after he had paused a little, he embraced me, and said, "How unhappy we have it! How ill we carry it!" He then heartily thanked me for my offers of service, but withstood resolutely the arguments I used to urge him to set himself free. He declared in earnest terms that he was fully bent on remaining rural. Well, ending, he revive, take root, and again overwhelm him. "Let me remain, dear sir," he said. In conclusion, "Let me revime Tbilisi, cat arotans agjero might revine and purchase asile, forever in the purchase, a joy of freedom, at the expense of the liberty of my reason, and at the future happiness, which may buy us, that the side If I was surprised before, I was quite dumb now, and stood silent, looking at him, and, indeed, admiring what I saw. The struggle in his soul was so great that, though the weather was extremely cold, it put him into a most violent heat, so I said a word or two that I would leave him to consider of it, and wait on him again, and then I withdrew to my own apartment. About 2 hours after I heard somebody at or near the door of my room, and I was going to open the door, but he had opened it and come in. "My dear friend," says he, "you had almost overset me, but I am recovered. Do not take it ill that I do not close with your offer. I assure you it is not for want of sense of the kindness of it in you, and I came to make the most sincere acknowledgment of it to you. But I hope I have got the victory over myself. My lord," said I hope you are fully satisfied that you do not resist the call of heaven." "Sir," said he. If it had been from heaven, the same power would have influenced me to have accepted it. But I hope and am fully satisfied that it is from heaven that I decline it, and I have infinite satisfaction in the parting, that you shall leave me an honest man still, though not a free man. I had nothing to do but to acquiesce and make professions to him of my having no end in it, but a sincere desire to serve him. He embraced me very passionately and assured me he was sensible of that and should always acknowledge it, and with that he offered me a very fine present of sables. Too much, indeed, for me to accept from a man in his circumstances, and I would have avoided them, but he would not be refused. The next morning I sent my servant to his lordship with a small present of tea and 2 pieces of China damask and 4 little wedges of Japan gold, which did not all weigh above 6 ounces or thereabouts, but were far short of the value of his sables, which, when I came to England, I found worth near £200. He accepted the tea, and 1 piece of the damask, and 1 of the pieces of gold, which had a fine stamp upon it of the Japan coinage, which I found he took for the rarity of it, but would not take any more, and he sent word by my servant that he desired to speak with me. When I came to him, he told me I knew what had passed between us, and hoped I would not move him any more in that affair, but that, since I had made such a generous offer to him, he asked me if I had kindness enough to offer the same to another person that he would name to me, in whom he had a great share of concern. In a word, he told me it was his only son, who, though I had not seen him, was in the same condition with himself, and above 200 miles from him, on the other side of the Obi, but that, if I consented, he would send for him. I made no hesitation, but told him I would do it. I made some ceremony in letting him understand that it was wholly on his account, and that, seeing I could not prevail on him, I would show my respect to him by my concern for his son. He sent the next day for his son, and in about 20 days he came back with the messenger, bringing 6 or 7 horses, loaded with very rich furs, which, in the whole, amounted to a very great value. His servants brought the horses into the town, but left the young lord at a distance till night, when he came incognito into our apartment, and his father presented him to me, and in short, we concerted the manner of our traveling, and everything proper for the journey. I had bought a considerable quantity of sables, black foxskins, fine ermines, and such other furs as are very rich in that city, in exchange for some of the goods I had brought from China, in particular for the cloves and nutmegs, of which I sold the greatest part here, and the rest afterwards at Archangel, for a much better price than I could have got at London, and my partner, who was sensible of the profit, and whose business, more particularly than mine, was merchandise, was mightily pleased with our stay on account of the traffic we did do. It was the beginning of June when I left this remote place. We were now reduced to a very small caravan, having only 32 horses and camels in all, which passed for mine, though my new guest was proprietor of 11 of them. It was natural also that I should take more servants with me than I had before, and the young lord passed for my steward. What great man I passed for myself I know not, neither did it concern me to inquire. We had here the worst and the largest desert to pass over that we met with in our whole journey. I call it the worst, because the way was very deep in some places, and very uneven in others. The best we had to say for it was, that we thought we had no troops of Tartars or robbers to fear, as they never came on this side of the river Obi, or at least very seldom. But we found it otherwise. My young lord had a faithful Siberian servant who was perfectly acquainted with the country, and led us by private roads so that we avoided coming into the principal towns and cities upon the great road, such as Tumen, Soloi Kamiskoi, and several others, because the Muscovite garrisons which are kept there are very curious and strict in their observation upon travelers, and searching lest any of the banished persons of note should make their escape that way into Muscovy. But by this means, as we were calling they desert, and we were obliged to encamp and lie in our tents, when we might have had very good accommodation in the cities on the way. This the young lord was so sensible of, that he would not allow us to lie abroad when we came to several cities on the way, but lay abroad himself, with his servant in the woods, and met us always at the appointed places. We had just entered Europe, having passed the river Kama, which in these parts is the boundary between Europe and Asia, and the first city on the European side was called Soloi Kamiskoi, that is, the great city on the river Kama. And here we thought to see some evident alteration in the people. But we were mistaken, for as we had a vast desert to pass, which is near 700 miles long in some places, but not above 200 miles over where we passed it, so, till we came past that horrible place, we found very little difference between that country and Mogul Tartary. The people are mostly pagans, their houses and towns full of idols, and their way of living wholly barbarous, except in the cities and villages. Near them, where they are Christians, as they call themselves, of the Greek Church, but have their religion mingled with so many relics of superstition that it is scarce to be known in some places from mere sorcery and witchcraft. In passing this forest after all our dangers were, to our imagination, escaped, I thought indeed we must have been plundered and robbed, and perhaps murdered, by a troop of thieves. Of what country they were, I am yet at a loss to know, but they were all on horseback, carried bows and arrows, and were at first about 45 in number. They came so near to us as to be within 2 musket shot, and, asking no questions, surrounded us with their horses, and looked very earnestly upon us twice. At length they placed themselves just in our way, upon which we drew up in a little line before our camels, being not above 16 men in all. Thus drawn up, we halted and sent out the Siberian servant who attended his lord to see who they were. His master was the more willing to let him go, because he was not a little apprehensive that they were a Siberian troop sent out after him. The man came up near them with a flag of truce and called to them, but though he spoke several of their languages, or dialects of languages rather, he could not understand a word they said. However, after some signs to him not to come near them at his peril, the fellow came back no wiser than he went, only that by their dress, he said, he believed them to be some Tartars or Kalmuk, or of the Circassian hordes, and that there must be more of them upon the great desert, though he never heard that any of them were seen so far north before. This was small comfort to us. However, we had no remedy. There was on our left hand, at about 1/4 mile distance, a little grove, and very near the road. I immediately resolved we should advance to those trees and fortify ourselves as well as we could there. For first, I considered that the trees would in a great measure cover us from their arrows, and, in the next place, they could not come to charge us in a body. It was indeed my old Portuguese pilot who proposed it, and who had this excellency attending him, that he was always readiest and most apt to direct and encourage us in cases of the most danger. We advanced immediately with what speed we could, and gained that little wood, the Tartars, or thieves, for we knew not what to call them, keeping their stand and not attempting to hinder us. When we came thither, we found, to our great satisfaction, that it was a swampy piece of ground, and on the one side a very great spring of water, which, running out in a little brook, was a little farther joined by another of the like size, and was, in short, the source of a considerable river, called afterwards the Wirkska. The trees which grew about this spring were not above 200, but very large, and stood pretty thick, so that as soon as we got in, we saw ourselves perfectly safe from the enemy unless they attacked us out on foot. While we stayed here waiting the motion of the enemy some hours, without perceiving that they made any movement, our Portuguese, with some help, cut several arms of trees half off, and laid them hanging across from one tree to another, and in a manner fenced us in. About 2 hours before night, they came down directly upon us, and though we had not perceived it, we found they had been joined by some more, so that they were near 80 horse, whereof, however, we fancied some were women. They came on till they were within half shot of our little wood, when we fired one musket without ball, and called to them in the Russian tongue to know what they wanted, and bade them keep off. But they came on with a double fury up to the woodside, not imagining we were so barricaded that they could not easily brigade. Our old pilot was our captain as well as our engineer, and desired us not to fire upon them till they came within pistol shot, that we might be sure to kill, and that when we did fire we should be sure to take good aim. We bade him give the word of command, which he delayed so long that they were some of them within 2 pikes' length of us when we let fly. We aimed so true that we killed 14 of them, and wounded several others, as also several of their horses, for we had all of us loaded our pieces with 2 or 3 bullets apiece at least. They were terribly surprised with our fire, and retreated immediately about 100 rods from us, in which time we loaded our pieces again, and seeing them keep that distance, we sallied out and caught 4 or 5 of their horses, whose riders we supposed were killed. And coming up to the dead, we judged they were Tartars, but knew not how they came to make an excursion such an unusual length. About an hour after they again made a motion to attack us, and rode round our little wood to see where they might break in, but finding us always ready to face them, they went off again, and we resolved not to stir for that night. We slept little, but spent the most part of the night in strengthening our situation and barricading the entrances into the wood and keeping a strict watch. We waited for daylight, and when it came, it gave us a very unwelcome. Discovery indeed, for the enemy, who we thought were discouraged with the reception they met with, were now greatly increased, and had set up 11 or 12 huts or tents, as if they were resolved to besiege us, and this little camp they had pitched upon the open plain, about 3/4 of a mile from us. I confess I now gave myself over for lost, and all that I had. The loss of my effects did not lie so near me, though very considerable, as the thoughts of falling into the hands of such barbarians at the latter end of my journey, after so many difficulties and hazards as I had gone through, and even in sight of our port, where we expected safety and deliverance. As to my partner, he was raging and declared that to lose his goods would be his ruin, and that he would rather die than be starved, and he was for fighting to the last drop. The young lord, a most gallant youth, was for fighting to the last also, and my old pilot was of opinion that we were able to resist them all in the situation we were then in. Thus we spent the day in debates of what we should do, but towards evening we found that the number of our enemies still increased, and we did not know but by the morning they might still be a greater number. So I began to inquire of those people we had brought from Tobolski if there were no private ways by which we might avoid them in the night, and perhaps retreat to some town, or get help to guard us over the desert. The young lord's Siberian servant told us, if we designed to avoid them and not fight, he would engage to carry us off in the night, to a way that went north, towards the river Petrus, by which he made no question but we might get away, and the Tartars never discover it. But, he said, his lord had told him he would not retreat, but would rather choose to fight. I told him he mistook his lord, for that he was too wise a man to love fighting for the sake of it, that I knew he was brave enough by what he had showed already, but that he knew better than to desire 17 or 18 men to fight 500 unless an unavoidable necessity forced them to it, and that if he thought it possible for us to escape in the night, we had nothing else to do but to attempt it. He answered, if his lordship gave him such orders, he would lose his life if he did not perform it. We soon brought his lord to give that order, though privately, and we immediately prepared for putting it in practice. And first, as soon as it began to be dark, we kindled a fire in our little camp, which we kept burning, and prepared so as to make it burn all night, that the Tartars might conclude we were still there. But as soon as it was dark and we could see the stars, for our guide would not stir before, having all our horses and camels ready loaded, we followed our new guide, who I soon found steered himself by the North Star, the country being level for a long way. After we had traveled 2 hours very hard, it began to be lighter still, not that it was dark all night, but the moon began to rise, so that, in short, it was rather lighter than we wished it to be. But by 6 o'clock the next morning we had got above 30 miles, having almost spoiled our horses. Here we found a Russian village named Kermazanskoye, where we rested and heard nothing of the Kalmuk Tartars that day. About 2 hours before night we set out again, and traveled till 8 the next morning, though not quite so hard as before. And about 7 o'clock we passed a little river called Kurtsa, and came to a good large town inhabited by Russians, called Osomis. There we heard that several troops of Kalmuks had been abroad upon the desert, but that we were now completely out of danger of them, which was to our great satisfaction. Here we were obliged to get some fresh horses, and having need enough of rest we stayed 5 days, and my partner and I agreed to give the honest Siberian who conducted us thither the value of 10 pistols. In 5 days more we came to Busima, upon the river Witsogda, and running into the Dwinya, we were there, very happily, near the end of our travels by land, that river being navigable in 7 days' passage to Archangel. From hence we came to Loromskoy the 3rd of July, and providing ourselves with 2 luggage boats and a barge for our own convenience, we embarked the 7th, and arrived all safe at Archangel the 18th, having been a year, 5 months, and 3 days on the journey, including our stay of about 8 months at Tobolski. We were obliged to stay at this place 6 weeks for the arrival of the ships, and must have intuition that any of the English ships, when, after some consideration that the city of Hamburger might happen to be as good a market for our goods as London, we all took freight with him, and, having put our goods on board, it was most natural for me to put my steward on board to take care of them, by which means my young lord had a sufficient opportunity to conceal himself, never coming on shore again. And this he did that he might not sit it in a way. We then set sail from Archangel the 20th of August the same year, and, after no extraordinary bad voyage, arrived safe in the Elbe the 18th of September. Here my partner and I found a very good sale for our goods, as well those of China as the sables, Ankin of Siberia, and, dividing the produce, my share amounted to 3475 pounds, 17s, 3d, including about 600 pounds worth of diamonds, which I purchased at Bengal. Here the young lord took his leave of us, and went up the Elbe in order to go to the court of Vienna, where he resolved to seek protection and could correspond with those of his father's friends who were left alive. He did not part without testimonials of gratitude for the service I had done him, and for my kindness to the prince, his father. To conclude, having stayed near 4 months in Hamburg, I came from thence by land to The Hague, where I embarked in the packet and arrived in London the 10th of January 1705, having been absent from England 10 years and 9 months. And here, resolving to harass myself no more, I am preparing for a longer journey than all these, having lived 72 years a life of infinite variety, and learned sufficiently to know the value of retirement and the blessing of ending our days in peace. The end. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey, the characters, and the world they carried with them. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows more timeless books to be shared with listeners around the world. Until next time, thank you for listening.